Good morning. Good morning from CSLDallas to our Science Mind class. We are we're delighted to be here this morning, and we say hello to everybody around the world, and all of those of you who were partying with us last night, celebrating Reverend Karen, and decided to watch instead of come in. But we're just happy to be together. It's super, super fabulous. So we are finishing up our chapter on the way it works. We're in the last 2 pages of the chapter of the way it works. These are the introductory chapters that were written in 1938 when the science of mind was sort of reorganized and some areas taken out, some chapters taken out that seemed like they were, what should we say, tangents that weren't quite as seminal to what we're talking about in terms of the philosophy. And then these 4 chapters were added as an introduction, as kind of an encapsulation and to get started in the idea of the philosophy of the science of mind. So the way it works really talks about the nature of reality and not just the presence, but the principle. And so we talked last week about how much of this principle we can use and how much good we can experience. And so we're in the section called How Much Can We Believe? That our belief, our ability to imagine good, our belief and our ability to accept good is the measure of how much good we can achieve or experience. Over and over and over and over again, I want to remind us that this good is not necessarily about the acquisition of stuff. Unlike our economic engine that wants you to keep buying, 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 this good has to do with the overarching good of our lives, the overarching experience of happy, healthy, joy-filled lives that allow us to really contribute our gift and our light and our talents and all that we are to the life that we desire. And whether that's a contribution in our families, to our workplaces, to the world, whether it's creative inventions or whether it's managing things or growing things or lifting up people or being with them in a healing situation. There's so many ways that we can contribute and that we're here to contribute. The challenge, of course, is if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's really hard to fully contribute who we are when our lives don't work, when we don't have food and we don't have shelter and we don't have our basic needs met, or we don't have a sense of belonging. We don't have a community or family or people to whom we are connected. It is challenging to fully contribute when what we need to do is contribute to our own lives. And so we begin with our own life. We begin with accepting that we can have lives that work. We begin with accepting that we can, in fact, create a life for ourselves that is that has all of the basic needs met, that has all of the opportunities, that then allows us to contribute. And then what we're doing, of course, is contributing to that hierarchy of needs for humanity as a whole and ultimately for all beings everywhere. So when we say more good or much good, remember over and over and over again that this does not mean the acquiring of stuff or the acquisition of things outside of ourselves that we think somehow are magically going to fill us up. Now, this doesn't mean that we can't have good things. That isn't the point. The point is that the good things aren't what necessarily our life is all about. So much good and more good is the quality of our life experience and the fullness of the experience. And for each one of us, that's different, right? But let's make sure that our level of acceptance isn't outwardly imposed. Or imposed from the consciousness that we received from our family, from our culture, from our growing up, from the people around us, from what we experienced in school or in any other place. Let's make sure that the ability for us to accept our good is not circumscribed by those things, but is circumscribed by our own acceptance and realization of what actually fulfills us. So, some people want a big house because they have a lot of family that they love to bring together. Other people, like me, my family is very small. I want a cabin in the woods because I want my small family to be able to go be in nature. One isn't more good than the other. One isn't better than the other. One isn't more spiritual than the other. It's the recognition that this much good and more good is about creating a consciousness of a life that is as unlimited as we ourselves can imagine and accept. So at the bottom of page 38, suppose one is laboring under the idea of limitation. Our whole thought is a picture of limitation. What are we placing ourselves in mind? We are saying in substance, I cannot have and enjoy good things. Right? When we say, I just can't believe it's possible, or there's no way that's going to happen, or, well, you know, it's never going to be that way for people in my family, or all the ways in which we limit ourselves. And we are demonstrating that we cannot have or accomplish that good. We're getting exactly what it is that we say, exactly what it is that we believe. And so what we want to do is recognize that because we are the individualized expressions of the one life, which is in and itself unlimited, our job is to stretch our consciousness, to begin to stretch it into imagining lives that are less limited. So for me, many of you have heard this story. For me, it was all about healthy relationships. I had an extremely dysfunctional growing up, extremely dysfunctional family. And so I had no idea how people were supposed to actually behave in a family. And so I began to pay attention. Like I watched Disney and Hallmark and all of those things. And that's how I decided people were supposed to be together. And what a relationship looked like. And then I got into relationships, and of course, boy, they just didn't turn out to be like Disney or like Hallmark. and I was like, wait, this doesn't work. This is no good. So I decided that relationships didn't work. I decided that for the most part, people were, well, I had a lot of judgment about the most part for people. And most importantly, I had judgment about myself. I decided that I was poison and that I would just basically screw up every relationship that I was ever in. And I really believed that for a long time. And then I began to really say, well, this can work in my relationships too, not just in money or jobs or stuff or all of those kinds of things. This very thing can work in building relationships that actually work. So I began to really explore what is the limitation that I believe in my own consciousness around relationships. And I realized that I had no idea even what a healthy relationship was supposed to be or what it was supposed to look like. I had no mental image. I had no real sense other than, you know, the movies and TV where all issues are resolved in 30 minutes or in an hour and a half. And so I began to, on the one hand, educate myself, but on the other hand, I began to work in my own consciousness, simply about the idea of accepting healthy relationships, that I could be in healthy relationships, and that it was okay that I maybe didn't know exactly what that meant, but because I'm an individualized expression of the infinite, which is monumentally intelligent, and all the love that is ever needed. Well, if it's all the love and all the intelligence, and that is moving through me, surely there is something within me that actually knows what a healthy relationship is and can attract it. So I worked on that for 5 years. I worked on that for 5 years, What does it look like to be in a healthy relationship? And I am a person who attracts that and is that. Do you see? I had to examine the limited beliefs that I had, and I had to directly engage with those limited beliefs by working to shift that inner consciousness. Come on in, my dear. Working to shift that inner consciousness and imagine it different. Imagine it differently. We must commence by saying, I perceive that because I am what I am, because of this infinite thing that overshadows eternity and find its abiding place in me, I know that good is now mine, all good. Even if we're not exactly sure what that looks like or how that's going to outpicture. Do you see? This is the growing of our consciousness, the greater acceptance of greater good. There's no mental coercion in this. We do not will things to be done. Things are brought into being not by will, but by the power of the self-assertive truth. There is love and intelligence in the universe. That's the truth of who I am. Therefore, it must manifest as healthy relationships in my life. Do you see? And every single time there's a thought that limits that, we have the opportunity to say, no, that's not the truth. It might have been my experience at one point, but it might have been what I thought was true, but it's not the self-assertive truth, right? Which is the spiritual truth or the universal truth or that which is true for all people everywhere all the time. So how much can one demonstrate? Just what one can believe. How much can we see? How much can we accept? How much can we find in our consciousness that is no longer repudiated by our own denials? Right? And so that's the, we can intellectually say all of those things, but we repudiate it by our own denials. When we have that inner feeling, that inner sense, we don't even have to articulate it in words, but that inner sense that shuts that down. That inner feeling, I just don't feel unlimited. I just don't feel like that's really true for me, right? That's when our feelings are lying to us. Or those feelings come out of those old thoughts. And so we have to work to have nothing repudiate these truths in our own denials. That's the spiritual work. It's as much spiritual work to release that which denies good as it is spiritual work to affirm that which is true. So we're doing both of those things at the same time. So the last section of this chapter is that because of what life is, it is only good. There is no force for evil that is contending with a force for good. There's only a force for good. And again, this is not the good of economic stuff, nor is this a moralistic good. So we'll take a little side trip here into the history of New Thought. Most of the people who are writing in New Thought in the 1800s and early 1900s had what is called a liberal arts education. And many of them read the Greek philosophers, the Western canon of philosophy, and follow a certain trajectory of thinking. One of the pieces of that comes from Aristotle. Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, he talks about the good. And what we don't understand in New Thought is that this is where this term comes from. Not from Christianity, not from religion. It's not a moralistic or ethical ethical good from that point of view. When Aristotle talked about the good, he talks about the good is anything that we feel or believe is good for us, and it is actually that which draws us forward in our lives. So that which is good for us is that which draws us forward, which moves us towards a fulfilling life. And for Aristotle, a fulfilling life had as much to do with what one contributes as how one has a life that works for themselves. And so his postulation is that the larger the good is, the longer and fuller and more completely it draws us forward. Now, a large good, the larger the good is, right, we all know, is not just more money or a bigger house. Because once we have more money or a bigger house, or we have achieved something, a particular thing, what happens? What happens? There's always the next thing, right? There's always the next thing, whether it's the next promotion or the next thing, right? And so the larger good, the larger the good is, the larger that, the largeness is how largely it fulfills us and fulfills our desire to be all that we can be. Well, to be all that we can be is to also fully utilize our gifts and talents to give all of ourselves into life in some powerfully profound way, right? None of us, well, they've proven it over and over and over again. Sitting at home, having the luxury to do nothing but watch television does nothing but depress us, right? All documented, right? All the ways, all just, the larger good is not more indulgence. Do you see what I'm saying, right? So I think about it, you know, I think about it the way that if I have a need for comfort, I used to always go to Starbucks. And that Starbucks would make me feel better. So that was a little good. And it gave me a little fulfillment, right? And then what happened? Well, I needed either another Starbucks or I needed to do something different. But do you see, it only drew me forward so far. And then thinking about the things that we do with our lives, or the things which for me, it's always been family and ministry, right? And the larger that I can see that, the more it pulls me into my life, the more joyfully I do all the things that are a part of whatever that is, because it's the larger good. Am I saying this in a way that makes sense to you? Okay, great. So every time you read in any metaphysical or new thought book, you must understand that when any one of these authors are talking about the good, they are not talking about something that's moral, although it often ends up being moral, right? We do recognize that taking from others is a small good. It doesn't actually fulfill us, right? Doing all the things that are, you know, the 10 Commandments all make complete sense, right? The more that we don't do those things, the more of the larger good is available to us. And the more we fulfill that, not only the more our lives work, but the more contribution we make. So we, you know, it's hard sometimes in our current language to understand what the authors are doing when they use these terms. So it's always about the good. And so there's good only, not good and evil. Why? Because the trajectory of life is always towards more life. So he uses the gardener, right? You put a seed in the soil, there's just the impersonal law that allows the plant to grow. The plant will grow, and it will flower, and it will fruit. And then it may die, but it's fruited so that there are seeds, so that there are more plants, right? No matter how you look at it, life is always for more life. So even in death, the nurse log in the rainforests of the Northwest, a cedar that has fallen over, will be a nurse log for unbelievable amount of life. And of all kinds, from the microbes to the mosses to the lichens to the chokeberries to the new trees that are going to take the place of where that tree fell. This is why we say for good only, because life is always for life. We are the only ones that can limit it and make it for something that is intentionally or unconsciously destructive. So we're always moving in that direction. So this is what we must instill in our own minds, the fundamental proposition that good is without bounds, because there's no limit to life. There's no limit to life. It's constantly growing, constantly evolving. And so knowing that this thing can work for us only through us, let us begin to accept today more good than we experienced yesterday, and know that we shall reap a harvest of fulfilled desires. So we're going to stop there. The way it works is by expanding our consciousness for who we are and how it works, for expanding our acceptance of that, and a willingness to align ourselves with this impersonal law and use it not only for our own good, but for the good of humanity as a whole. So we're going to stop there, and we're going to say good morning to everybody who is out there online, and for all of you who've come in, and we're going to say hello, Ryan, and how are you this morning?
Well, I'm doing very sluggish after the party last night. It was turned all the way up. So, yes, well, good morning, everybody. Hello, I'm Ryan. And for all of those folks online, hello, good morning from all over the world. I see a lot of folks from all over the place checking in and saying hello. So thank you wherever you're at in the world. And this is an interactive discussion, everybody. So it's really easy to participate, and we encourage everybody to get in on this conversation. And the way that we do that is the folks that are here in the room with us, go ahead and raise your right hand. Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're not the only one who's
me.
sluggish this morning.
All right. Well, okay. Anyways, so just go ahead and raise your hand. Please just say your name and any question or comment that you might have. That way the folks online can hear you and be a part of what fruitful conversation you guys are talking about. And for those here on Zoom, let's see you hit the raise your hand icon. And hopefully if they can find the button, they might be a little sluggish this morning too. I see a few names from last night. All right. Thank you so much. And that's the way that you participate. Hit the raise your hand icon, and I'll go ahead and pull you into the room. And for those on Facebook Live, you can put your questions and comments inside of the comments field, and I'll pull that into the room, as well as the folks in on Zoom. You can put your questions and comments as well. So love to hear from you. Anybody here in the room like to have a question or comment?
Or a sharing. So while you're thinking about it, while you're thinking about your question or comment, we're hoping that Glow and Bob Umphris are watching us from Mexico, because Glow, your name was pulled in the raffle last night for one of the beautiful photographs. So Glow, Karen will be reaching out to you for you to pick your photograph, since you got a raffle ticket and your name was called.
Yes.
All right. I know, it's very exciting.
Glow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to see anybody here on the Zoom room have any questions or comments before we move forward.
It's a quiet.
Yes. So I see that we do have one, and it asks, how do you know the difference between self-imposed limitation or just being safe or prudent?
Oh, what a great question. Yeah, well, that is a great question. So, my sense of it is being safe or prudent is never fear-based. Being safe or prudent is what makes us feel confident. It is only a self-imposed limitation when we are operating out of fear. And the less fear-based we are, the less we can recognize that our safety actually lies in knowing the truth of life, of who we are and how we wander around in the world as the individualized expressions of love, the less safe and prudent we actually discover that we need to be. And so our need to protect ourselves becomes less and less and less fear-based, and less and less and less limiting. And so, yeah, so that's a good question. And the truth is, only you can answer that question. We can only ever answer that question for ourselves. Really, nobody has a right to tell us we're either being too self-protective or we're not being self-protective enough. We are the ones that have to really have a sense of, are we operating out of a sense of calm, either intuition or intelligence, or are we allowing our fear to run us? Ryan, coming back to you.
Yeah, and I just see that Bob and Glow were on the chat. They said, "We won! We won!" They're excited.
Yay, I'm so glad.
But we do have Connie here. So Connie, would you like to go ahead and unmute yourself and join the conversation?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Connie.
Good morning. I want to say, first of all, Reverend Peter, I so appreciate your transparency, personal transparency, that you talk about your life, you know? You don't put yourself on a pedestal, and, you know, you're real, and I so appreciate that, because I can relate to it, you know? It's so good.
Good.
But what I wanted to say is not really a question, but
it's a comment.
Anyway, maybe into a question. I feel so blessed that I have work that I love that contributes to other people, and I get to be of service in teaching English as a second language, because it opens up the person's life. You know, when they learn English, they can and learn better English. Maybe they can get a better job, go to college, connect with people, all of that. And you know, in Dallas, over 50% of the people here are native Spanish speakers, and that's a lot. We're right, you know, we're right on the border with Mexico and Texas. But yeah, I feel so satisfied. There's so much good in being able to be of service and then do something that I truly love. My background is in cultural anthropology, so I love that diversity, and I get to learn about that.
Beautiful. Yay, thank you, Connie. Thank you so much. And I love what you say, because one of the things we get to see is that making a contribution to life is not, it does not require, it's not required that it's a sacrifice. It's not required that we martyr ourselves so we can do good work in the world, right? I mean, listen to what Connie said. It's fulfilling. She's following her bliss, and her bliss is doing good work in the world. These two things, when we are embracing the good, these two things are, they fit together. I don't remember now who this quote is from. Somebody's going to put it in the chat, I'm sure. And the quote is, find that place where your deep gladness meets the deep need in the world. When your deep gladness meets the deep need in the world. So if your gladness is artistic, or your gladness is being with your grandchild, or your gladness is building a business, whatever it is, right? When your deep gladness meets the deep need, not when I set myself aside, give up all of my hopes and dreams so that I can do good work in the world. Do you see that sacrifice and martyrdom? And that's what does not serve. And yet, when those two things are married together, then our lives are filled with good, and we ourselves are expanded. And the good that we can do and the contribution that we make is expanded. That's how life is supposed to work. That's how it's supposed to work. And sometimes our work, our doingness, isn't maybe, what shall we say? Maybe it's not as creative as we would like it to be. But maybe we can bring our whole self to it so that we can provide a contribution, so that we can be financially remunerated, so that we can give our good not through our work. Right? Do you see? But if anything that we're doing, we can see that we're doing what the end result is that we're doing. Right? I might be working so I can raise my children and be with them on the weekends. Or I might be working so that I don't have to be a starving artist, so that I can do my art and still take care of myself and my family. Or I might be doing my art and my art is financially supporting me, and I'm giving my contribution. Or I'm starting a new business and I have nothing for a year or two until this business starts to flourish. We had a beautiful conversation with Armando a couple of weeks ago, and he shared about that. And do you see, so we don't want to couple bliss and the job that we have. Does that make sense? Right? It's the whole life and the way the life is put together. And if we can see the good that we are growing our consciousness around, the good of our whole life and the contribution it makes, then the pieces start to fit together. And well, truthfully, I don't know anybody who has a life where they don't have to do things they don't want to do. I mean, it could be as simple as, you do actually have to answer your email. You do actually have to take out the trash. You do actually have to, right? I mean, we all have lives, and we have things at home and at work, and even in traveling, you got to carry your suitcase, or you've got to, get your itinerary together, whatever it is. There's always pieces of it we don't like. And we think that, well, if I'm following my bliss and I'm contributing and my good is growing, then I should never have any of those things. And what makes that true, that I never have any of those things, is because even the things that I'm doing that I don't like to do, when I know that they're in service to the good or what I'm contributing, then they have less weight, right? They don't pull us down as much, because we're not focusing on, I don't like doing this. We're focusing on, this is in service to this greater contribution, to this greater good, to this expanding experience of life. And yeah. And so we don't want to make the mistake of coupling our bliss with our job. What we want to do is couple our bliss with our contribution to life and our own personal fulfillment, right? In whatever constellation that is of the puzzle of our life, right? Because the puzzle of our life is a lot of different things. All right, we have a comment back here from Nicole.
All right.
Thanks,
yes.
Richard.
And then we have somebody here online
Great.
as well, so we'll go to them next.
So, really relevant topic for today. I'm very glad that I was able to make it into the room and catch a little bit of that message. But a frustration of mine that I would really love to hear your perspective on is, when you are following your bliss and you're contributing to the world around you, and it does bring you a certain satisfaction, and there's always those naysayers, those people that you have to block out that say, oh, well, that's great, but you could have done it better. Or, oh, that's wonderful, but we expect more of you. It gets very exhausting ignoring that all day, every day, and it can be very harassing. It's a great message to say, oh, well, you have to block it out, but let's say you're a teenage child and your parents are just in your face telling you that you're not good enough. You can't block that out. You can't ignore that. You have to learn how to process it in a very healthy way. And even then, when you try to process it in a healthy way, you're living in a household. They come in and they say, well, you know, that's great that you're looking at it from that perspective, and that's going to serve you well in the world, but you're not going to do that here with us. How do you respond to that? The way that I have coped with it in the last 2 years is to just not put that out into the universe. Don't press my expectations on other people. Don't be so highly critical of them in my own heart. Even if I'm looking at someone across the room and thinking, oh gosh, that outfit is just terrible. Not only am I keeping it to myself, I'm also having a conversation with myself in my head. Oh, well, that's not really okay for you to say or think that way. And I have noticed that the less I put that out into the world, the less I receive it from the world. And some people, that just seems to be their only contribution, is how critical they can be of others. They're just born to be critics.
Well, so Nicole, it's always a challenge, right, that when we are rubbing up against other people. I don't believe actually people are born to be critics. I think they're taught to be critics, right? And so you evidence that beautifully. What happens when you are the recipient of that kind of critical thinking, it is inevitable that you will do the same. Right? It's inevitable that you will look at the world that way, because that's what you've received as a child, and that's what you've received as a teenager. And you can't actually do anything about the family members that are doing that. Right? What you can do is precisely and exactly what you said, which is not only to seek to have a positive attitude around things, but to notice when you yourself are falling into the pattern of being critical. Because people are critical, they're taught to be critical. Children are not critical. They're just lights. Babies and young children are just lights. And at some point, usually around school, when you start getting marks for whether you did it right or not, and earlier, if you have a very critical family, right, then you begin to take that on. And that becomes the way in which we think. So one of the things that has, having grown, okay, I grew up in a very German household, right? German equals critical, critical equals German in many ways, right? You can always do it better, you can always do it perfectly, that's right. And thank God, you know, had a little balance. My mother was pretty unconditionally loving. Which helped balance some of that out. But as I grew up, one of the things I realized is, as critical as someone is about me, they are living with that same criticism inside their own head. And as I began to really see that, man, did my compassion grow. Because I can feel how debilitating my own criticism is to me and to my relationships. And the more critical I am, the more damage I do. The more damage I do to the people around me, right? So sometimes what we're learning is how not to be. Right? That's sometimes what we're learning. And it is a challenge. I do not subscribe to any version of karma that says you attracted your parents so that you could learn a lesson or be punished for something that you did in a former life. I know that those are very popular ways of thinking about it, but I believe that robs us of our personal responsibility of growth and development. No, I think it's your parents' fault that you grew up in a critical household, not yours. It was my father's inability to deal with his own life that caused him to be an abusive man. Not mine. It was not my fault as a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old or even a 10-year-old. It was not my fault. That was his responsibility for creating the life that we all grew up in, right? But my responsibility is what I do with that. Am I a victim of that my entire life? Am I willing and able to see the ways in which that became a part of how I saw life and how I behaved in life? Am I willing to own the fact that I took on some of those behaviors because I didn't know any better, right? I became critical and angry and all kinds of things. And the healing work that I had to do was within myself. And ultimately that healing work allowed me to then look at my dad and go, oh my God, I cannot imagine the pain he's in. And he lives, what I receive in doses, he lives with all the time. That's going on inside him all the time. When I was able to really feel the reality of that, that shifted my relationship with him. And he could be as critical as I want. And truly, I didn't have to work to ignore it. It just rolled off because I knew that was the best he could do. That was the best he could do. And the less I reacted to it, right? The less we put it out, the less I reacted to it, the more effortless it became. And as I became an adult, I was able to create boundaries. Right? And as a teenager, it's really hard. It's challenging to create boundaries when you're a kid. I mean, you are stuck with the life that you have, right? So for me, unfortunately, I chose not to be stuck with it. I ran away when I was 15. So that started its own set of challenges and problems in my life. I started doing drugs and alcohol. Let's see. Yeah, I started smoking at 11, started smoking pot at 13, and on from there, all the way through my teenage years, right? Because I didn't know how to cope. But what I was doing was escaping and protecting myself until I was actually able to do that, right? Some kids, they don't have the luxury of running away, but we do find ways to, as adults, to begin to create those boundaries out of the growth of our consciousness. So I learned as an adult, as I began to do this work and was able to actually be with my dad for periods of time, I learned that I could visit him for 3 days. That's it. And I went to my room at 8 o'clock every night because that's when the shit really hit the fan. I mean, enough alcohol had been drunk by that point, right? 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock. Sorry, I have homework to do. Oh, I'm going to read my book. Oh, I'm going to do something. And I would just go into my room. I might not go to bed till 11 or 12, but that was my boundary, not to be in that space, not to be in, right? That's because we're adults. And then we begin to have boundaries. So this is, yeah, it is hard. It is hard to grow up. It is hard to take responsibility for these things. It is hard to practice. There is no question about it, Nicole. And every one of us has this road to walk. Every single one of us. I remember saying to my son, you know what? I'm already putting money away for your therapy. Right? Because we all know and we have to deal with our family situations, the families that we grew up in, and there's no one who escapes that. There's no one who's had a perfect childhood. There's no one who's had a happy life. All the ones that, you know, don't ever compare your insides to somebody else's outsides. Don't ever do that, because you don't know the road that that person has walked. We've all walked that. And so what we do is we come in community together and we hold each other up and we hold each other's hands when we're exhausted. We're exhausted of being positive. We're exhausted. I remember my son said to me the other day, he said, I'm so tired of having to be the reasonable one. Oh, I said, welcome to becoming a grown-up. And I said, I used to get so mad about why am I the one who has to be conscious? Why do they get to have a temper tantrum and make a mess? Why do I have to be the one conscious? I want to go unconscious and I want them to be the one to call us to consciousness. Ooh, I was mad for years until I realized I liked myself better when I was the conscious one. And it really didn't matter what they were doing, because I liked who I was when I was the conscious one. And I said that to him and he went, oh, because he was beginning to sense that he was happier with himself when he was being reasonable, right? Because then you can look at yourself in the mirror and you know that you've done what there is to do. And the other person, they're going to have to just take care of themselves, right? And so, you know, this is spiritual maturity. This is what we do spiritually as we're spiritually maturing, and we don't have to do it alone. We have each other here in the community, whether you're online or in person, right? Because sometimes it is our families that have created the greatest havoc in our lives, and that we have to, you know, we have to do that work. All right, fabulous. So we're going to start next week. We're going to start the next chapter. I'm so happy to spend this time with you this morning. Val is going to be here after the celebration. If you're coming in for the celebration, Val's going to be here before she takes her beautiful stuff down. And so if you are looking for holiday gifts, there's some fabulous things up here. So we'll see you in the celebration. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, have a beautiful week. Bye for now.